How do we understand Kasha Silukan Shel Tzadikim Yosim Yichurban Beis Hamikdash? And the simple answer is that the Beis Hamikdash was the place in the world where there was Ashras Ashchina, where people got to know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was and does. But a tzaddik is a human being who he himself is a makom for Ashras Ashchina. The Bach says in Hilchas Birkas HaTorah that now that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, a human being who sits and learns is the place where the Shechina rests. The 6-Day War, so right after the 6-Day War was over, many Yidden felt that this was it, Mashiach is coming. And Shavuos by night, it's hard to learn because this was the first time they were going to the Kaisel, and they thought, Mashiach is here in a week or two. And Reb Chaim Shmulevitz gave a shmooze that night, and he said, Rabbi Isai, he says, the Kaisel is holy, but the Stender is Kodesh HaKadoshim. Because a human being who sits and learns, he is the Merkava L'Shchina. The Shchina rests on him. That was Reb Chaim. The Gemara says, Gemara in Ksubis, that when a person who teaches Torah dies, it's Ein Leishir. The amount of people who are mechuyev to come to his levaya is limitless. Why is that? Because, and this is the point that you have to remember, that all of the neshamas of Klal Yisrael are connected. If a person's neshama is a chelik eloka mimal, and as Reb Chaim Volozhiner explains, it is like a pipe. A person has a nefesh, which is his life force, his ruach, which is his ability to speak and communicate, which already an animal does not have, like the pasuk says in Bereishis, Vayihi ha'adam l'nefesh chaya, and the Targum translates l'ruach memalala, the ability to speak, and above that you have the neshama. The neshama is, as it were, connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and all neshamas of Klal Yisrael are connected. That is why there's a concept of tefillah b'tzibur. You have 10 people, they are each connected. Kol Yisrael arevim, doesn't say zeh lo zeh, one to another, it says zeh bo zeh. And the Jewish people are one chelik, in other words, every person's neshama is a part of the neshamas of Klal Yisrael, and the as the Chassam Sofer puts it, the Klal Yisrael is like a body, and the tzaddik and the Talmid Chacham is the head. Because there's a serious question: how could it be that somebody has a problem and somebody else can daven for you? Right? If you have a problem, you go to the Chacham. What is this? He has like Rabbi Yerucham puts it, he has a bag of candies, of brachas candies that he can give out. Here, you're sick? Here, bakasha. Here, feel better. Well, a person has to live on his own merits. And if you're not there, and if HaKadosh Baruch Hu's geyser on you, how could I go to Reb Chaim or to anybody else that he should daven for me? And clearly, people went, and it was effective. How does that work? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu's geyser on somebody at Sarah or in Nisayan, going to somebody else to kind of like, get it fixed, how does that work? And this only works, the Chassam Sofer says, if you understand that Klal Yisrael is one body, and therefore when one of the limbs is not well, you go to the head, that it should deal with it. And the tzaddik is within what's called the guf of Klal Yisrael. The tzaddik is the head. Okay. That is how we say it on Shabbos. Ato echad v'shimcha echad, umi ka'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. So goy echad ba'aretz means that we are all connected, and Talmud Chacham shemeis hakol krovov. So just like you have to go to a levaya of a brother and a sister and a father and a mother and a son and a daughter and a spouse, you go to the levaya of the Talmud Chacham because a part of you has died. Now, let us discuss a few things. And that is, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin Daf Kuv Beis, that when Reb Elazar was sick, so nichnesu chachmei Yisrael levakroi, and each of Reb Elazar HaGadol's Talmidim said to him what role he played in Klal Yisrael. Reb Tarfon said, Toiv ata li Yisrael mitipa shel geshamim. You are more beneficial to Klal Yisrael than a drop of water. And the comparison is because a drop of water enables physical things to grow, but a Talmud Chacham of that stature and of that magnitude helps human beings grow. And the next one said, the next Tana said, you are greater than the sun and the moon, because the sun and the moon give light to the guf, and you give light to the neshama. And the third Man Diyamar said, you are greater than parents, because parents take care of a child in this world, and you take care of a child in Elam Haba. Now, the most important thing for us to remember is that Reb Chaim was not a genius. You get it? He was a plain guy. In terms of his intellectual abilities, he was no greater than anyone sitting in this room. You have it? So you say, well, if that's true, first of all, and that is not a disparagement in any way. Most Gedolei Yisrael were Gedolei Yisrael not because of their, pardon? Not because of Schus Avos, and not because of your intellectual capacity. A person has to know that really a human being cannot ever understand the Torah, which is the Dvar Hashem. That's Hashem's wisdom. How does a human being understand that, ever? And it is only, as the Chassam Sofer says, and as Rabbi Rucham says, it's called the Soid HaMilui. What does that mean? Turn that off. Re'ei karasi b'shem B'tzalel ben Uri ben Chura l'mata Yehuda v'amalei oisay ruach halakim, it says. I will fill him up with ruach halakim b'chachma b'svuna b'das u'b'chol malacha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took B'tzalel and he filled him up. And Rabbi Yerucham explains, the Chassam Sofer says it too, it's every human being. A human being is a kli, which, depending on how much room there is, and depending on how much it is prepared and perfected to be a kli, will receive the Torah Hashem. We say every day in the Birchas HaTorah is always said b'lashon hoive. Noisein HaTorah. Sheboch Rabbanim Mikol Ha'am v'nosal Hashem v'chato Hashem. Noisein HaTorah. A person who sits and learns, his job is to make himself into a kli. And how do you make yourself into a kli? Number one is you get rid of any sense of self. The Torah says only one thing about Moshe Rabbeinu's personality. V'ha'ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol ha'adam asher al pnei ha'adama. That Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble human being. He thought nothing of himself. He himself took up no space. And as Rashi says, anav savlon. How are you sovel someone else? Because if the more space you take up, the less room there is for someone else. And humility is the one criteria that the Torah tells us about Moshe Rabbeinu. It doesn't say he was smart. It doesn't say anything about him. And the Reb Chaim Volozhiner says in the Ruach Chaim, in Avos Perek Aleph Mishnah Aleph, that if a human being would reach the level of humility of Moshe Rabbeinu, he could be Zoicha to Torah like Moshe Rabbeinu. How's that possible? Because it's all about making yourself into a Kli. To the point that the Medrash says about the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, it says, Chachma utvuna bohema. Bohema means in them. But the Medrash darshans bohema to mean behema. That what? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu was memale even the behema with Chachma. Now how's that possible? The answer is, if you're doing it, there's a difference between a human being and a behema. But if Hashem is pouring it in, for him there's no difference. And the Chassam Sofer's analogy is slightly different, as we say, V'chaye olam nota b'sercheinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu plants a seed in us. If you take a seed and you plant it, if you leave it alone, it'll rot. If you water it and you give it nourishment, it can grow into the most amazing tree. That is what Torah is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when a kid is born, he has the seed in him. Question is what you do with it. And Reb Chaim did with it. Reb Chaim was not an intellectually gifted human being. Neither were many of the Gedolei Olam. I'm not going to mention who they are. The Netziv is famous. There's someone else who tell you a story about him. When he was 18 years old, and this is somebody who every single Bacher in this yeshiva has learned his Torah and has been told his Torah by his Rebbe. When he was 18 years old, this was before the war, 18, he asked someone pshat in Rashi in Chumash. Rashi in Chumash says that, it says in a few places, he said they came Mitzrayimah. What's Mitzrayimah? To Mitzrayim? Wherever the Torah wanted to put a Lomeid, instead of saying Li Mitzrayim, the Torah says Mitzrayim, put a hay at the end. He didn't understand the Rashi. This is a Rashi that a third grader gets. And he became one of the greatest Talmid Chachamim in the Jewish people. So nobody can say, Reb Chaim, yeah, he was the Stipler's son, he was the Chazon Ish's nephew, and he was very smart. He was not very smart. Of course, the Torah made him. But naturally speaking, and the emes is, with the Sod HaMilu, you could understand how it is possible for a human being to know so much with such clarity. It is not possible. That's the answer. It's not. A friend of mine, the story is famous, the one who put out the Marals, once saw a Maral, that the Maral says that Tchias HaMesim will start in Hebron. Said it without a source. Looked around. This was the days before Eitzur HaChachma. He asked many people. Nobody knew anything. He told me, there's this guy who's the biggest mumcha on Hebron, knows everything in Chazal about Hebron. Go to him. Okay, goes to him. No such Chazal. His mother lives in Bnei Brak. So he's walking down the street. He sees Reb Chaim. He said, okay, I'll go ask him. Goes over to Reb Chaim and he tells him what the Maral says. And Reb Chaim goes, 1 second. Torah? No. Nevi'im? No. Ksuvim? No. Talmud Bavli? No. Yerushalmi? No. Took about a minute and a half, about 90 seconds. Then he said to him, it's in the Zohar, such and such a place. This is a man who did not have a photographic memory. He didn't. He did not. But he learned. He was a masmid. And there was no self in him. There was no zich. He had no I, no me. And the less room you take up, the more room there is in this kli for Torah. The more you nourish that seed, not with junk and not with other stuff, but with the nutrients and the nourishment and the water that it needs, that's how strong that seed will grow and how it will flourish. And that's what Reb Chaim was. He had what's called the Soid Hamilui, as Rabbi Yerucham calls it, and that is why he knew Kol HaTorah Kula. Now, people used to come to him every day, dozens. That was in the last few years, and before that even more. And someone asked him, one day he was like totally exhausted. And he said, so his son or grandson asked him, why is Zayd exhausted? He says, people think I give 2-word answers and I just randomly say it. People don't understand how much effort goes into saying those 1 or 2 words. And he didn't want to speak more than that because a human being has a limited amount of words that he is given when he is born. And he did not want to waste those words on anything that was not necessary. And that's why he said bua, meaning bracha batzlacha, because he could not mention those 2 words, because 2 words times 200 people a day is 400 words. I don't have 400 extra words. It's like a guy who is a big diamond dealer, okay, and he has a packet of diamonds. And he's a billionaire, and the packet falls on the floor. He will pick up every single diamond. What do you mean? Come on, you got in the safe another $1 billion worth of diamonds. Doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. So his grandson asked him, so okay, if it takes so much effort, why do you do it? And he said, is there a Rabbeinu Yonah here, Shari Tshuva? Perhaps? Let's look. It's not here. Anyway, Rabbeinu Yonah says in Shar Gimel, Ois Yud Gimel, he says a person is required to strenuously work for somebody else, to do l'takonas chaverei. I have to be involved in taking, a man is not an island, that it's only about me and it's only what's good for me. Your job is to take care of other people. He would answer dozens of letters a day for the last 50 years, many of them to children. And somebody asked him, like, what are you answering a kid for? And he said, what do you mean? If he wrote me a letter, it means he worked hard to write the letter. It means he learned the inyan that was important to him. And by me answering him, I am encouraging him. So for little children around the world, he answered their letters. I still remember when I was a bacher, this was a thing. You got a letter that the return address said Chaim Kanievsky. Just 50 years going. Because it wasn't as a v'toras chesed al l'shoina, as the Gemara says, Pia pascha b'chachma v'saris chesed al l'shoina v'chiyesh Torah shel chesed v'Torah she'eina shel chesed. Thank you very much. Thank you. V'Torah she'eina shel chesed, and the Gemara says Torah u'malamdo la'acherim, it's Torah shel chesed. And Hashem is interested in Torah's chesed. Your Torah is going to be Torah if you teach other people. The Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah does not begin with the din of learning. It begins with the din of teaching Torah. because the din of learning Torah is an outgrowth of the din of teaching. Where do we learn the din of learning Torah from? V'gisa b'yamim v'layla says in Yoshua, it doesn't say it in the Torah. We learn it out from V'limadatem oisem es b'neichem, b'shinantam levanecha. Your chiyuv to teach includes that you have to learn as well. And Reb Chaim understood. He said, listen, I don't say a shir in yeshiva. So this is now, he didn't look at his svarim as teaching. I mean, that's in itself his humility. But he was a teacher. And he answered probably thousands of letters a week. There are dozens of svarim that were written just when the mechaber has the question and Reb Chaim's one or two word answers. And he said to somebody, he says, you think when I write yitochen, yes, no, maybe, each word took kol haTorah kula into consideration, and it was distilled into that. And let me read you the Lashon of the Sha'ar Tshuva, and this is for us as well. It's in Sha'ar Gimel, Oisid Gimel. V'yesh b'mitzvahs hasei min hachamuros. This is min hachamuros. Ki chayav adam litroyach, a person is obligated to work hard, bidrishas toiv la'amoy, to make it good for other Jews. V'lishkoid ba'amal nafshoy al takonas chaveroi, and take care of someone else, make sure it's better for him, im dal im oshir, whether he is poor or rich. And dal im oshir does not only mean whether he's poor or rich monetarily, it also means whether he's poor or rich in anything that counts, in Torah, in social skills, in midos. He took care of everyone. V'zois min hachamuros. This is one of the most chomer mitzvahs aseh, mina ikrim hanidroshim min ha'adam. And for the most fundamental things that a person is required to do. There's something else here, which was that the care and concern for someone else's money was endless. Someone, Rabbi Yiman, his chavrusa, once told him a famous story about a man who came to his father's stipend and left a pen there. And a year and a half later, the guy came back. Some random guy, clearly, if he only comes once in a year and a half, he wasn't close to the stipler. And the minute he walks into the door, the stipler says, I'm waiting for you, you left your pen here. So Reb Chaim says, I'll tell you a better story. He says, I went to my father's house, and I had to use the facilities. But since I didn't specifically ask him, and I didn't want to bother him, if I could use the toilet paper, I brought a roll along for myself. He said 5 years later, I had to use the facilities again. And I see the roll of toilet paper is still there. Okay, and I asked my sister, Rebbetzin Barzam, who lived next door, and she was, after the stipler's Rebbetzin was nifter, so she took care. What's the deal on that roll of toilet paper? She said, well, somebody left it here 5 years ago. Now, in 5 years of hundreds of cleanings, Erev Shabbos, Erev Yontiv, Erev Pesach, nobody touched it. What is it already? It's a roll of toilet paper. What's the big deal? That's the story. It's not, you don't touch someone else's. A woman once came to the Chazon Ish and asked him for a bracha, and he gave her a bracha, so she took out money. He said, oh, no, I don't take money. And there was somebody there, and he said, there's the yeshiva, Ramat Sharon, the Chazon Ish takes care. What do you give it to her? He says, no. We're not taking a penny. We don't take money for brachas, and nobody has to give money for brachas. There's no such thing. What belongs to someone else does not belong to you. And not only what belongs to somebody else monetarily, what belongs to somebody else in terms of his job, if you take somebody else's job, If you take somebody else's covet, Gemara says in Saita, you take something that doesn't belong to you. So the guy thinks, like, there was once two guys who had a fight, and one guy clearly cheated the other. Chaim was in a lot of pain about it, and he said, people think that if you cheat, maximum, they'll take away from you what you shouldn't have gotten. Not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that they will take away from you even what is yours. So if you take somebody else's money, you take somebody else's possessions, you take somebody else's job, you take somebody else's shidduch, you take somebody else's covet, it's not only that they're going to take that away from you, whatever you do have that should be yours will be taken away. Now, people think, okay, but I'm not the Stipler's son. I'm not the Chazon Ish's nephew. I'm a regular guy. So we've already shown that regular intellectual gifts are not an issue at all. They're only an excuse, and a pretty weak one. That's piece number one. And somebody says, well, my personality, my this. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter had a Talmud. He had three famous Talmidim. He had many Talmidim, but his three big Talmidim were Reb Itzel of Petterberger, Reb Simcha Zisel Ziv, who was the Alta of Kelm, and the third one was Naftali Amsterdam. Naftali Amsterdam once said to his Rebbe, he said, Rebbe, if I would have the head of the Shagisari, if I would have the heart of the Yesod V'Shorish Avodah, and if I would have the midas of the Rebbe, I could be somebody. And he said to my friend, he says, Naftali, Hashem wants you with your head, with your heart, with your midas. No one in this world is created and is here to be like somebody else. Doesn't count. Hashem's not interested that you be like somebody else. Hashem wants you to take what you have, your kli, your seeds, and do something with them. And that's what Reb Chaim did. There was no sense of self. And that's why he was able to give brachas to everybody. Because everyone was connected to him. In other words, why can't you give a bracha? Because I have me and I have my space, and don't invade my property, okay? Then there's a mechitza between me and someone else. But if I don't have a sense of self, and you go into the Godel's house, I was wondering once, you go to Rabbi Leib Steinman's house, people would sit down on his bed, talking to him, and not necessarily his grandson. Okay? They sit down, the Rashi was sitting on his bed, guy needed a seat, so he sat also on his bed. What a man, does the man have any sense of privacy? Right? And the answer is, who is me? And this Reb Shimon says in the Hagdama to Shari Yosher, who is me? Okay, when a kid grows up, me is myself. When you get married, hopefully, me includes your wife, right? Like everybody knows the famous story of Rabbi Levine. Went to the doctor and said to him, her foot hurts. He says, our foot hurts. Okay. Right? So, and hopefully as you go on in life, me includes my kids. By Adam Godel, me includes everybody. So this is your room like it's mine. And you can't say the words but not live them, because then the words are empty. But that's what it was. His house was a Hefkeveld. Okay, when he got older, his grandchildren, had to protect him because otherwise he'd get overrun. But for most of the years, there was a simple wooden sliding door that divided between him and everybody else. And he sat in Koil like everybody else. There was no me. And if there's no me, when somebody comes and asks you for a bracha, you're davening for yourself. And that is the koyach of Reb Chaim's brachas. He was davening for himself. It was his problem. So he was talking to God as it's his problem. So God listens to him. It's not trying to help somebody else. And God will say, listen to somebody else, and let him work it out. No, that's me. That's me. Reb Moshe Feinstein complained. He said, people come to me when they have a tzara. But when the things get better, they don't call me up and tell me. So what was he doing? He was kvetching? No. Moshe wasn't kvetching. Reb Moshe was saying, my koyach to daven is because it's me. But if it's me, then I should know that it got better. But if you are not telling me, so clearly you don't think it's my problem. So if it's not my problem, you're not letting me daven. And Reb Chaim saw every Yid's problem as his own. And it didn't matter if the guy was frum, if he was fry, if he was Talmud Chacham, he was an Amoritz. He used to say, Reb Chaim would say, the Mishnah says in Avos, V'hevi mekabel es kol ha'odom b'sever ponim yafos. In other words, greet every human being b'sever ponim yafos with a smile. You know what kol ha'odom means? Every human being? Even someone you can't stand. Because you're talking to yourself. And even if you're angry at yourself every once in a while, you still don't say, you get up in the morning, you say, I'm not washing my hands. Why? I'm mad at myself. You're doing it, right? Because I'm not eating today. Why am I eating? Because I'm angry at myself. You need help, right? And that was Reb Chaim. He didn't see himself as different than anybody else. They're all me. That's the definition of a God. So when I daven, when I give a bracha, I'm davening for myself. And there's something else here, which is when people would ask him something and he would say something and you were like, whoa, where did that come from? There was a fellow who came to him with his son. Bnei Brak, younger man, came to him with his son. Son's having bar mitzvah. And he asks for a bracha for the boy. Okay. Chaim gives him a bracha. And then he says to the father, and when is your bar mitzvah? Paul says, what? He says, yeah, when's your bar mitzvah? And the man walked out totally, shaking. He didn't know what's going on. He went home and he asked his mother, he says, this is a younger man in his 40s. Learning for dozens of years, Talmud Chacham. He asked his mother, Ma, I was just by Reb Chaim. This is what he said to me. Is everything, So he said, so then she broke down and she said, well, I had a gerus and it wasn't so good, really. And Reb Chaim caught that. He didn't tell him anything. And the point is that, as the Gemara says, when a Talmud Chacham talks, it is kishkoga hayotze milifnei hashalit, meaning to say, and Reb Elchanan Wasserman explains this, that a person's mouth is like a razor blade. Okay? When you're born, your mouth is like a razor blade. And let's say somebody's swinging his hand, and the razor blade goes on somebody's silk shirt. Silk shirt is gone. Whether he meant it or he didn't mean it. Because when a razor blade touches a silk shirt or anything else like that, it kills it. That is the power of speech of every human being. Now, what's the problem? The problem is you take the best razor blade in the world and you use it for junk, it will become dull and it will become full of rust. Right? Chaluda. The power of a human being's speech is pure. And it's like a razor blade. And it can stay like a razor blade. But if you use it for things other than for Divrei Torah, if you use it for Dvarim B'Telim, or Chas V'Shalom Dvarim Asurim, the blade loses its razor sharp power. But somebody who spent his whole life only learning Torah, not talking Dvarim B'Telim, not doing anything else, the razor blade stays sharp. And that was Reb Chaim's ability to say things, and they made a difference. When Reb Chaim gave a bracha, it was good. And Reb Chaim didn't respond, you knew you had a problem. And the stories like this are in the tens of thousands. It's not a one-off. And everybody has one. How did he know? Because when a person, there's two things here. When a person is only Torah, so it's not him talking, because he has no self. It is the Torah talking. And is the Torah talking with the power of a razor blade that has not been dulled an entire life. How do we do this? Take a look at the last parak of us. Two things. One is the Memches Dvarim Shatayra Niknas Bohem, 48 ways that a person acquires Torah. And the other is Kol Lomeid Torah Lishma Zeichel Dvarim Harbe. And what does Torah Lishma mean? I'm learning, for whatever Pshat in Torah Lishma is, I'm learning Torah to know Torah. That's all. I just got to learn because I got to learn. Or Kol Lomeid Torah Lishma is I'm learning it not for the sake of covet and not for the sake of recognition and not going to say because Hashem told me, or so that I should know to do the mitzvahs. And Zeichel Dvarim Harbe, and as the Mishnah says in the 6th parak of Avos, all the things, Banan Mimenu, Eitzav Shashia, etc., an entire list of things that someone who's a Lomeid Torah Shema has. This is what we lost. Reb Chaim, yes, was a one of a kind. The Yediyas HaTorah of Reb Chaim, the Klarkeit in Kol HaTorah Kula, the ability to find a Chazal for somebody who did not have a photographic memory. He didn't have it. Some people have photographic memory, you could just turn pages in their brain. That was not what was happening. And it was something else. Reb Chaim, in this Kli, as we said, didn't put anything in there besides Torah. And that is why people could tell him something, Mili de Alma, and come back a week or two later and he didn't know what they were talking about. So what's the matter? He couldn't remember? It didn't go in. I heard it for a quarter of a second. It's like, for example, somebody who is, give you a bad example. There used to be, when I was growing up, there was a newspaper that did all the scores, all the things of all the horse races, called the Daily Form. Okay? Now, if somebody were to show me the Daily Form and show me that this and this horse won this and this thing last week, and the next week they would say, so what you saw last week, I wouldn't know what he's talking about. Not because I'm a big tzaddik. It never went in. I don't care. I don't care. Which horse and which horse race and which time, who cares? Didn't go in. It was meaningless to me. And to Reb Chaim, anything that wasn't Torah was meaningless. And that's why he had room for Torah, because there was nothing else in there. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu could fill it up, because there was no other junk in there. And this is something that he kept his whole life. And that's why he was the Yeled Shashuim, so beloved by so many people. Believe me, and if the police wouldn't have scared everybody else, there would have been another 250,000 people there. Who? Why? Because this piece of meat that died. Right? The Talmud Chacham is the aggregate of the hopes and the accomplishments of Klal Yisrael. And the time will come when your grandchildren are going to ask you, Graham said, did you ever hear Reb Chaim Kanievsky? He says, yeah. Not only that, if I was smart enough and I went along with the yeshiva, I was there by his levaya. Because this was a historic moment, this was a historic era, that a human being, as I said, who didn't have a photographic memory, who wasn't this sharp guy, knew more Torah with much clarity than anyone living today. Because there was nothing else going on except for Torah, except for Chesed, except for living for other people. And this is something that we ourselves can learn from him and can take from him. The Gemara says, the Tshuvas HaGoyim says, I think it's Simon Kufayin Ches, that when Rav died, his Talmidim got together and each one of them decided that they're going to take something from the Rebbe. It's not always easy, but you could try. And those who were at the Levaya, who as I mentioned on the bus, who wanted to take something from the Rebbe, a little bit you could be zeicher to it. And if there's anything that we can learn from the life of Reb Chaim is, number one, that anyone can become the greatest Goyen in the world. It has nothing to do with your background. It's nothing to do with your intellectual gifts. It has to do with how much you make yourself a kli, by your amelus, by getting rid of any sense of self, by doing what the Torah says in terms of your tahara, so you don't have any junk, that your mouth doesn't talk dvarim b'telim, doesn't talk lashon hara, doesn't talk dvarim asurim, and then you abilities as the koyach of your peh to be mispalel for others, to bench others, to learn Torah, stays sharp. And although people think, well, listen, I'm 20, I'm 25, I messed up already. Take a look at Rebbe Akiva, who started at 40. 40, and he was, as the Gemara says, an Amoritz, mi yitneneli Talmud Chacham v'anashchena kachamor. He hated Talmid Chachamim. And the Gemara says, why like a chamor? When the Farshim say, why like a chamor? Because when a chamor bites, it doesn't just nip the skin, it cracks the bone. Right? And this is Rebbe Akiva, someone who Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, when Hashem showed him Rebbe Akiva, he said, if you have somebody like this in the world, what do you need me to give the Torah to Klal Yisrael? So nobody has an excuse here. Let us try to learn, and with Hashem on Sunday there's going to be a Spadim here in the yeshiva, hopefully learn from the life of Reb Chaim, and let us all grow to become like he was, with our hearts, with our midas, with our minds, a Talmud Chacham, a Yirei Shamayim, a Bal Midas, and a Bal Chesed, without any sense of self. There's no zich. I'm not part of this equation. And then with that, we can be zeicher to the Soid HaMilui, HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'amalei ois ruach elakim b'chachma b'svuna b'das u'b'chol melacha.